Okay. Hello and welcome to anyone who's tuning in. This is going to be another Shakespeare conversation on Radio de Vere. And this time we're going to be talking with Jeff about something he's been immersed in and studying for many years now, Shakespeare's sonnets. I have a little bit of something I'd like to contribute to this, some historical bibliographical context for the sonnets. But I was thinking, Jeff, first of all, did you want to remind me like how you got started in the sonnets? And I was interested both in like I know that you at certain points in your life have had the entire sonnet sequence memorized.
Mm.
And also, what was that process like? How often were you reciting these sonnets to
Yeah.
yourself? What were you gleaning from them as a month went by, as 2 months went by, that sort of thing? And also, maybe to start with, I know you had said that a Nabokov quote
Yeah,
had kind of started you out there. Could you tell me what that was again and where that comes from?
that's great.
Yeah.
Good to see you, and, yeah, you know what I have to do after this conversation? I have to locate that quote, so I don't always say, "He says something like this." I just need to find it, pin it down,
Okay.
because I think at this point in my mind, it's changed a little bit, but I'll just to answer your question more fully, I, you know, Shakespeare wasn't I wasn't a big fan in high school. No problem with Shakespeare, but just, like, it was too hard for me, I didn't understand anything. Then, when I moved to Ashland, Oregon in 2005, I split my time between being a therapist and working at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. So I started seeing the plays, and I started really starting to love the plays and learn about them, and each time I would crack open a sonnet, I didn't like them, and I just didn't I thought they were supposed to be love poems, they didn't make sense to me, and they didn't sound loving, so I was like, "I don't know what's going on." Um, and then I think I just got the sequence right. I've been telling people it was the Nabokov quote, but you know what? I think I need to give Hank Whittemore credit because I think what made the sonnets, palpable for me was I was starting to get into the authorship question, and then his monument came into my hands through him. He gave it to me, a copy of that, and I actually got one into the Shakespeare Festival library. Um And that is what made me start reading them and thinking about them, because he has such a specific theory, but it's such a fun, interesting, dynamic theory that then all of a sudden you have a way to think of the sonnets, and they were interesting, and I was thinking about the authorship question, and that actually was what made them start becoming, um, like a part of my reading. I never fully, I now I don't go with his theory, but I still really respect it and really respect I mean, you do not have to take all of his theory and to see how much genius and time and insights he packs into his work on the sonnets. You always learn something about the sonnets when you're reading Hank's stuff. So, it was during that time that I decided I'm gonna read all of Nabokov's books. So I was in the middle of reading his novels one year, and I came across a quote where he said something like I think he says it's in the sonnets. I think he says, um, "In Shakespeare's sonnets, nobody has ever paid so much attention to the texture of the human language of the English language."
Yeah.
And I was like, "What does he mean?" I love his writing, and I think he pays attention to the sound of language and the structure more than anybody. So if he thinks Shakespeare's doing that, and then that really is when I got opened up to, like, falling in love with them. And Booth here, Stephen Booth's book on the he has 2 books. One is he goes through every sonnet and breaks down the language. In another book, he goes through his essays on the sonnets, his theories. They're just my favorite. They're my bibles of Shakespeare.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
No, and so the memorization practice, where did that come in?
Oh, yeah. So, um, so I guess at some point, I think it really was the Nabokov that then made me go like, I wanna know what it's like to have all the sonnets inside my head. Like, I want to know what that feels like. I can just have everyone in the sonnets. And I'm kind of an extremist and a little bit of a performance artist. So I just thought this will be an interesting project. So I had been going to the gym a lot. I just built what I did, the way I did it, and someday I'm going to actually look through my notes to see what I had such a system
Yeah.
going. I'm not very obsessive compulsive, but this was by far my most obsessive compulsive behavior I ever engaged in because I'd go to the gym and I remember every time I went to the gym, I was there for 45 minutes on a treadmill and I would put one sonnet in my mind.
Mm.
And I remember what I do is, you get a rhythm going at the gym,
Yeah.
and I would just say the first line maybe 20 times. I had some real system like 20 times, then the second line 10 times, then both lines together, then the third line 10. I just had this system where I kept, and then by the end of 45 minutes, I could say that sonnet um, by myself, just
Yeah.
in my head. And then I had to every day remind myself of the sonnets I'd learned the 2 days before. Mostly it's about every 2 days I'd go. And, so I had a system in the mornings walking where I would say the ones I know, and then I'd learn a new one. And, it was so regular and so it became such a science in terms of putting them in my little brain.
Okay, that's interesting. And I guess the last thing before that, so this takes a long time, like it takes a year or whatever,
Yeah.
thinking. Now, as so you're repeating the sonnets again and again, just to keep them in memory so they're not
Yep.
like the phrases aren't slipping. And I know it's so easy to twist a little word here or there, and suddenly it's not the same. But
Yes.
I was thinking, like, what in your experience, like, what is happening to your understanding of the sonnets over time? Is it more about like the language he's
Yeah.
using? Is it about like, are you starting to get like stories and characters in your mind? Like
Yeah.
what's unraveling over time through this process?
It's a great question. I think my answer is gonna be because of 2 things. One, I just don't have the kind of memory I wanna have where, um, academic type things stay in my mind or quotes or anything like that. I'd love that memory, but I don't have it.
Mm,
So, that part of me I think if I had that kind of memory, not only would have been memorizing the sonnets, I would have been thinking about chunks of them in certain ways
mhm,
because I would have been like, "Oh, that chunk." But for me, a sonnet exists as a one each sonnet is an event. I have to start it from the beginning. "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day, thou art my love?" And if at any point I get distracted or a word won't come to me or I say the wrong word, it's not like I can then just, like, go back a little bit and do it. I have to start from the beginning because it's one event,
mhm.
and that frustrates me because, I wish I could just, like, pause and then keep going in the sonnet. I can't. And, so it was because Stephen Booth's work on Shakespeare sonnets is he's one of his theses is the reason why these are so different than any other sonnet sequence, um, is because Shakespeare is doing these micro things throughout them, changing patterns syntactically, semantically, phonetically, narratively to the extent that there's a narrative. And he claims that Shakespeare has found a way to change patterns, set them up and change them enough that the reader is enjoying and getting sort of seduced by the experience of the texture, and then we tell ourselves all these other reasons we like the sonnets. Like, we say that, like, it's so great because he's, like, being so angry in this one, or he it's really clever how he says this, and he's not saying that's not true,
Mhm,
but Stephen Booth's claim is that what makes Shakespeare in general so incredible is that it's this micro texture and patterning that is just you can't find anybody else doing it quite like that. So, when I was going through the sonnets, I was just letting myself fall into the rhythms and textures and sound moments, and that's kind of what I fall in love with and think about. When I'm being an Oxfordian or I'm thinking about authorship, I do put on another hat,
yeah,
and I do think about the sequence, from that perspective.
mhm. So there's kind of a literary appreciation on one hand, and then possibly this other. biographical or authorship related um, channel of thought that is maybe
Yeah.
a little separate, but connecting maybe at points too.
Yeah, because a key thing in the sonnet sequences, starting with Petrarch, is um, that the writer creates a persona of themselves, and then they kind of mock that persona by having that version of themselves fall in love with somebody who rejects them, and they kind of play on their narcissism. And a lot of people read sonnet sequences as if these are legitimate, like, they don't see the irony that the writer is having so much fun mocking sensual love and carnal love, and then they're also trying to play games to point towards a divine or an eternal structure. So most sonnet sequences, the big ones, Petrarch, Sidney, Spenser, they are always working on two levels where you've got the person speaking, which is a persona of the speaker, and then you have one level that is, "Oh, why don't you love me? Oh, no, you rejected me." And another level is really trying to point towards social and religious kind of themes. And I loved learning about that as I was reading sonnets.
Okay. So I'll just maybe interject a little bit here because so we've been talking for a long time and I have known about your love for the sonnets. And the sonnets have not been a big aspect of my own reading. I'm much more into the plays, even the narrative poems. Like the sonnets are, I don't know, they're hard to, maybe like you, they're hard for me to get into a little bit. And then I always have something else that's easier to access. So I go to
Okay.
that. So I've read them through, I think only the full sequence back to back once, maybe one and a half times. And this was after I had met you. So I was kind of having, I never had your ideas in, your precise understanding of the sonnets, but kind of got the flavor of your approach to them and what your appreciation of them. Um, so I was thinking, like, I'm really excited for this because this will just be a first talk. We can talk about the sonnets in many other ways as we continue. This is more of an introduction. But I was thinking for myself, like, okay, now I'm coming back to it and I would like to get more into it. For myself, I hear people talk about them, especially in the Oxfordian scene and the authorship scene, people who are so immersed in them. And I'm getting these little details coming out. I'm like, okay, let me just step back first and get a few things squared off about when they were published, the context of the publishing, how they were received, and maybe that will be like for me, that's kind of like a scaffolding or a framework that we can start. Then we can just dive back into the poems and give it some additional historical context.
That's
So,
great.
okay, so I just made up a little slideshow here that kind of just based on some basic research that I did. Okay, so I think what you've mentioned a lot before, like Shakespeare's sonnets, they were not the earliest by any means of the Elizabethan sonnets, which, kind of began, I guess, these sequences began in the 1580s and then really became popular in the 1590s. So I just wrote out a few of the names of the major ones. There are others, but I think Thomas Watson's Hecatombathia, that is another one that I actually have studied, and I think it often gets left off the list,
Uh-huh.
the sonnets, I guess because, um, they're 18-line poems, they're not like the classical Italian sonnet, but, he apparently in his introduction to his he does call them sonnets, and there might have been
Yeah.
a looser definition of sonnet at the time. So
And doesn't he dedicate that one to De Vere?
that one is dedicated to Vere, and it's got in the front matter, it's got like dedications and letters from very definitely John Lilly and George Peele were in there, so
Yeah, yeah.
it's an interesting document for that, but it's also I found a very readable and, it's kind of a progression you can follow along with,
Yes.
and,
Yes.
it's not a really forbidding collection of poems. It's complex, but it maybe not as complex as Shakespeare, but and then I also noticed that, like, so I guess Philip Sidney's Astrophil and Stella, that's what sets off the craze for sonnets in the 1590s.
Can I
What's
jump in
interest
real quick?
Yeah,
Just to say, interesting thing about Thomas Watson, his has, it's a century of sonnets,
yeah,
100, I think, and I'll be talking later about, the 100 sonnet center of Shakespeare's.
Okay.
So, and Shakespeare's often seems to be referring back to all the sequences in various ways.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting thing. And then my understanding is that Philip Sidney's, they think he wrote it in 1582. They think
Yeah.
it was complete in one form, but then you're right, it wasn't published until 91, and that's what kicked off the craze.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure they were circulating in manuscript in various forms before that, but, it gets, put into, an unauthorized and an authorized translation in
Mhm.
1591. And then there's some others. I know that a lot I haven't read these, but Samuel Daniel's Delia is considered like a high water mark for the era. Thomas Lodge does like a pastoral sequence of sonnets, I guess. Michael Drayton, he has Ideas Mirror, and I think this is one that he's also revising and republishing. So the
Yes.
first one's 94, and the next one I think is 99.
He does it, he rewrites that thing all the way through the next 2 decades, I think.
And I guess it makes kind of sense with you because you may feel that there's some revision going on throughout Shakespeare.
Yeah.
And then Spenser's Amoretti, another cherished work of the sonnet sequences.
Mhm.
Uh-oh. Here. Okay, so for Shakespeare sonnets, before that 1609 publication date, we have I guess two ways, but unless you were going to take some um, contextual things out of the plays, we have two definite like non-Shakespeare references that establish that these sonnets were being written in the 90s, at least some of them, right? So we have from Francis Mere's Pallidus Tamia, 1598. He writes of the sweet witty soul of Ovid lives in mellifluous and honey-tongued Shakespeare. Witness his Venus and Adonis, his Lucrece, and his sugared sonnets among his private friends. So that gives a sense that they at least some of these sonnets are being circulated in manuscript form, and there's some sort of literary circle there with private friends.
Yeah.
And then there's another unauthorized kind of scurrilous edition of some of Shakespeare's poems, 1599, William Jaggard, The Passionate Pilgrim, and that contains two of the sonnets apparently in slightly different versions. Uh, People think of these as earlier versions, 138 and 144.
Mhm.
Okay, so for the 1609 publication of the sonnets, that was entered in the Stationer's Register on the 20th of May, 1609. And I always wonder, was that
It should be on everybody's calendar, but
you're yeah, I know you're like an anniversary dates guy, or
Mhm.
the a yearly annual
Oh,
liturgy
yeah.
of all the Shakespeare dates, yeah.
Yep.
Okay, and so I'd always like kind of seen this title page. I never knew what this bottom stuff was, and I'd seen so much. My introduction to this was like cryptographical work from like,
Yeah.
yeah, so then I'm just like, what does it actually mean, all this stuff on this? If we're not going to be drawing triangles and stuff on it, just be going,
Yeah.
right? And I guess that never before in printed is interesting. And so as far as I understand it, the publisher was Thomas Thorpe. He's the TT there, and he acquires the manuscript and arranges for the financing for this to be printed. So he hires George Eld, who had a print shop, and we know from from textual analysis of the sonnets that he has two compositors that are working underneath him, and they seem to have different habits. So you can maybe tell compositor A, compositor B, who's composing what, right? And I guess the interesting thing that I have heard many Oxfordians and Orthodox Shakespearean scholars mention that there seems to be only one single print run of the sonnets,
Mm.
even though Venus and Adonis and Rape of Lucrece are massively popular through the 1590s, and they keep being published through the first half of the 1600s. This seems to be a one, and for whatever reason, not that popular, not reprinted, not that easy to get a copy of. And
Yeah.
to this date, we only have 13 extant copies of that original 1609 publishing.
Yep.
And the only little interesting thing there, you can see on this copy, this is one to, so this is, it's at London, printed by George Eld for TT, and it'd be sold by William Aspley. And four of these copies were supposed to be sold by William Aspley, and four by John Wright. So they had, I think Aspley was like right in the book center at St. Paul's Churchyard, and
Uh,
John Wright, he was a little It's very close, but a little further north. So maybe I think Catherine Duncan Jones said perhaps partway through the run they thought we should sell these at his because travelers came and went through that northern gate where his.
Oh, fascinating.
So yeah, I do remember the Aspley one caught my attention because I remember Alexander Waugh saying this is the one if you're going to be doing the crypto lot
Yeah.
graphical work, get this one. So we won't get into that today. It's just why.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, so here's the interesting thing. So you get that to me anyway, just as my brief overview of this. And I'm so interested in Shakespeare, not only during the Elizabethan and Jacobean eras, but through the entire Stuart era, the Civil War, and right into, the 18th century, like this history of this longer history of Shakespeare, right? And so if you didn't get a copy of that 1609 edition, the very next copy that was available was 1640 under a title Poems written by William Shakespeare Gentleman, published by John Benson.
Yeah.
And I guess this is the interesting thing about that. It's he alters the sequence. He
Yeah.
alters many of the pronouns, so you're getting rid of anything
Yeah.
that makes like a love poem from a male to a male. That's getting switched. He's arranged, altered the sequence and omitted some sonnets, and he adds like these melodramatic titles for the poems. So he's kind of giving you a story of how to take it in. And as far as I know, this was like not a prestige work. It was like a kind of a lower tier publisher, not the best reputation, and it's not published in like a nice quarto edition or folio. It's a small octavo format, something for your pocket. And this guy was generally a printer of like ballads and, like lower
Well,
class literature. So it wouldn't have had that high class representation. And the other thing I just thought of the other day, this is published right at the opening of the English Civil War. So I think, whatever, like there's gonna be 20 years of disruption where this thing was like available for, so it's another thing it's a reprinting of Shakespeare sonnets in a mangled form at a moment when no one's paying that much attention to Shakespeare, right?
yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so then there's this coming into the next century, the Nicholas Rose Shakespeare. This is a 6 volume set of the plays. And this is like when Shakespeare really begins to gain more prominence again. It's got the first biographical information about Shakespeare. And so they completely left out the sonnets, but another publisher he sees an opening here. The Shakespeare sonnets are always being tucked in by the disreputable published printers for another
Yeah.
100 years. Like it's not the main guys who are liking them. They are not. It's the people who are trying to tack on Shakespeare sonnets because nobody else did, right? So someone does that to him, and they make it look like it's the 7th edition of Rose Shakespeare.
Mm.
They make it look like, oh, if you got the first section, you need the 7th printed like in the same format, same kind of typography and everything. But it's just John Benson's mangled copy again. That's what they did. So
Amazing.
okay, so 1711, right around that same time, another publisher, Bernard Lintott, he actually does for the first time do a new edition of the 1609 sonnets. So that's the first time in 100 years you could actually get a new printing of that original sequence restored to how it first was, right? But again, I don't think his book kind of slides under the radar because of all that Rowe edition and the reprinting of Benson's edition. It kind of it wasn't like it didn't really make a mark compared to the rest of it, although it was
Mhm.
available. Then you have some of the big editions of the 18th century. You have Alexander Pope's edition of Shakespeare and Samuel Johnson's. Both of them completely ignore the sonnets and the poems. They want to focus on Shakespeare as a dramatic playwright, and both of them did not like the sonnets. And
Uh,
again, in Alexander Pope's edition, someone comes on and tacks on an unauthorized 7th volume with the sonnets. And I think that was again the mangled Benson edition, right?
Gosh.
So really for like 170 years, something like that, I really get the sense that in the general reading public, you were either unaware that Shakespeare wrote sonnets, like it wasn't
Uh,
in your head, first of all, you knew the plays. Second of all, you may have known the narrative poems, Venus and Adonis and Lucrece, but the sonnets were kind of out of sight, out of mind. And for people that were in the know, like Pope and Johnson, the sonnets were embarrassing. They didn't like them, right? That sort of thing.
Mm.
So first time you can actually get like a major respectable annotate, well, not maybe not annotated, but a lot of scholarly apparatus worked into this is 1780 Edmund Malone. He publishes a supplement to Johnson's and George Stevens edition, 1778 edition of Shakespeare, and he includes the sonnet in the original 1609 format with a lot of respect and care shown for like understanding them. Like this is the first scholar who really, he's not like
Mhm.
John Benson, just, tacking on something for commercial purposes. He's like, these need to be part of, our understanding of Shakespeare. And in 1790, he puts together his own edition of the plays and poems that has all the first folio plays, along with the 1609 sonnets and the narrative poems. And I'll end that there because we could keep going like this.
Yeah.
I guess for Edmund Malone, people didn't love this. Like that George Stevens, who's one of the first early Shakespeare scholars, he was furious with Malone for putting these out. He thought these were so embarrassing, tarnished Shakespeare's reputation.
Yeah.
He had this line that you could not make an act of parliament that would force people to read these terrible,
Yeah.
embarrassing poems. And I will say, like, I'm sure that a lot of people, maybe on a lesser level, like the people that were enjoying these poems, if they knew about them for those first 170 years, was probably more like your lower class reader, if anybody. But
Yeah.
I really feel like, as it looks to me, William Wordsworth was the first one. William Wordsworth and John Keats were the first ones to like the sonnets, like
Yeah.
that recognizable names. And
Yeah.
so this, you can see how this younger generation of poets, this controversy about Edmund Malone dropping all these personal suffering kind of agonizing poems from Shakespeare, they had loved the controversy about it, and they're gonna like, this is gonna be our thing, that
Yeah. Yeah. I can see
reverses
that.
it. So I
That's
think we should look back at this at a future time, like do maybe a long history of the sonnets, like
I love it. Yeah.
keep going
I
through
would learn. This is the stuff I want to learn. I've read
oh
books about it,
yeah.
but to have it start getting systematized, I think is great. And I forget it all the time. So hearing you just reminded me of so many interesting things we can talk about in the future. In
Yeah.
fact, I saw Keats quote, he his is highly qualified, but he
Yeah.
praises them in that he's like, yeah, Shakespeare was like screwing around with conceits or something, but like within that, you find some of the most brilliant things. And
Yeah.
I think I love that.
I
Um,
the three quotes that I heard were Wordsworth was kind of first to it, and he said that Shakespeare's sonnets unlocked his heart.
that's
And
right.
and then Keats kind of followed up, and apparently he was gifted when he died when he was really young, but he was gifted one of Malone's, like, the subsequent edition of it, and he wrote notes, and he wrote his own poems in the margins, and, like, it was kind of like a notebook for him.
Cool.
And then apparently Samuel Taylor Coleridge was obsessed with them, but he was highly troubled by them, and he was, I think, kind of trying to find a way where this wouldn't be a love poem from a man to a man. Like, could there be some other reading, like simply to
I wish
put,
I could talk to him.
yeah, and then yeah, and yeah, we won't go into any of this today, but I have to think. Well, first, here's two thoughts that I kind of got from you. One, the idea of a love poem from a man to a man, in whatever way that would be. Like, I know some Oxfordians would think a father to a son, some would think, bisexual lover, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But that has to be a huge reason why these sonnets were so ignored and suppressed and embarrassing. But one other thing you had said to me that, like, when I first did my first reading through them, I felt like in college we had done studies of some of them. Like, I remember really liking Sonnet 8 and things like this, like certain sonnets, like just brilliant in isolation, right? But as I
Yeah.
read them as a sequence, it was a little jarring, not what I expected. Um, I don't know, jagged, not to,
Yeah.
and I think you had said something
Yes.
to me like, um, these poems might be like if you just picked up like a John Coltrane album when you'd only ever listened to Count Basie. Something like that, like it
Yeah.
would seem a little bit like, "What is this?" Like, it's not
Yeah.
quite what I'm expecting.
That's
So
funny. Yeah.
so I think that I'll end it there, and then so what, as I understand, you're gonna give us kind of like a first
Yeah.
walkthrough or a mapping of, like, if you wanna start getting an understanding of these structurally,
Yeah.
how can you start approaching it?
Well, there's so okay, yeah, thank you. First of all, thanks for that introduction, that was awesome. Yeah, I was thinking, so structure, I'm gonna share, like, a walk through the structure. And now you could analyze the sequence from many different structural point of view. And in fact, in Seattle in September, I'm going to do a presentation in which I'm going to talk about them from a totally different structural point of view, and that's more from the architectural. Um, Sidney and Petrarch and all these guys. This is a book that goes into it beautifully. Called Proportional Form and the Sonnets of the Sidney Circle, and as more scholars look at the structural elements in terms of architecture and number, you start to realize that, like, part of the reason we feel something so exhausting and jagged when we try to read a sequence is because it's almost like, we're looking at it incorrectly. Uh, and so today, what I thought I'd do is, since I'm not gonna be getting into the more complicated structures that I think really relate to the Oxford case in a big way, I'm gonna talk about just a walk through the sonnets in a basic talking about the basic subsequences, because everybody talks about the fair youth, everybody talks about the dark lady, and we can kinda just go from beginning to end, starting from the 100 sonnet center, because it creates this beautiful um, picture of the symmetry. If we start from that I always appreciated, and Hank did not discover this, but Hank definitely grasped it and saw so many reasons why it's a wonderful way to start seeing the structure of the sonnet. So basically, um, there's 154. I'm going to talk as if so many people might not know
I
anything.
like we're just starting reading these.
Yeah, there are 154 sonnets, and he numbers them. Interestingly enough, and we can talk about it, one does not have a number above it, all the rest do, and there's fun reasons I think that could be the case. But we have 1 through 154. And one of the first things that you'll hear people talk about is the last 2 sonnets, 153 and 154, are these, like, we've left the stories of love and the woman and the man, and we just get these 2 little sonnets on Cupid, and they're almost the exact same sonnet.
Yeah.
Um, and they're numbered. In the tradition of sonnet sequences, when this sort of thing happens, they don't number those, and they're called, you'll know the word better than me, but it's like an anacreonic. I think they call them anacreonics, and they're little epigraphs off of Greek stories,
Yeah.
and they typically think of them almost as an introduction to the complaint, the big long poem that comes after them.
So
Uh,
in this one, the lover's complaint in the original edition, the lover's complaint is printed at the end.
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, you get the Cupid Sonnets 1 through 4, you turn the page, and you're in a lover's complaint.
I've got a facsimile edition so I can follow along with you as
It was
we're
good,
talking.
good, good.
Yeah.
Because I might ask you sometimes to look at a certain word or something. So I say all of this to say this. So you can clearly think of the sonnets as 154.
Mhm.
And then they're split in half. You get 77, 77. That equals 144, and that kind of makes sense. But when you look at those 2 Cupid sonnets, it's also very tempting to just push them aside, and you look at, we've got 152 that are actually
Yeah.
a piece of work together.
Yeah.
And then when you have 152, 76 becomes the centerpiece, and 152 is where you get this beautiful 100 sonnet center
Yeah.
between sonnet 26
Okay.
and sonnet 120. I'm sorry, sonnet 27 and sonnet 126. That's 100 sonnets. You have 26 on one wing,
Okay.
and you have 26 on the other wing, and
So
in the middle.
if you do that, you have the 26, 126. Does that include the last 2 or the last 2?
No, they're put aside.
Okay.
They're put aside. We put Cupid to the side,
Yeah.
um, and then we get that. And there's all sorts of reasons I think it's very, very justified. One of well, in September, I'll be talking about a really interesting symmetrical thing that's happening when
Okay.
you take 152 as the endpoint.
Yeah.
But right now, what I'll say is, um, well, this could be where I walk you through the sonnets and we start to see why the 100 sonnets gets justified. But I'll say really quickly, Sonnet 26 is a prefatory sonnet. Um, it's a sonnet that almost looks, it's very witty. He's basically saying, like, I'm only sending you these sonnets you're getting
Yeah.
out of duty, not out of wit. I have no wit, but if you look at me in the future and think I have wit, then oh my gosh, that'll be a joy. And then I'll show myself to you.
Yeah.
Um, but it's 26 that does that, and then 27 is the most narratively driven opening of a sonnet I can find anywhere, where he says, "Weary with toil, I haste me to my bed. The dear reposed for limbs with travail tired." And he uses the word pilgrimage in there. He uses the word it's just very filled with like something's happening now,
Yeah.
which I always like that it comes right after the prefatory sonnet of sonnet 26.
Weird. It's almost like you're introducing a dream theme or something like that, or
Yeah, and a journey and something's happened because the couplet, if you look at the couplet of 27, it's about weary with toil, or no, what's the final line in the couplet?
uh,
The final 2 lines?
lo, thus by day my limbs, by night my mind for thee, and for
And
myself
for me still.
quiet find.
Yeah. So, it's even like, it even brings it down into the couplet, like, I am trying to do something here. It's just a very activated sonnet. So, that's and then sonnet 126 is the last sonnet to the fair youth, and then you get into the next 26 sonnets are to the dark lady. So, there's some of the structure, but as just from the beginner's level, um, the first 17 sonnets are called the procreation sonnets. A lot of people call them the procreation sonnets. And those are the sonnets where it feels like all you're hearing is, "Hey, you gotta have a baby if you wanna live forever. You're the most beautiful person on the planet. Have a baby, live forever. Have a baby, live forever. Have a baby." And they're a little tedious. I know a lot of people, even at the Shakespeare Festival, would just, like, roll their eyes when you mention the procreation sonnets.
Yeah.
Um, and and it's sonnet 18. So, okay, in an Oxfordian world, it's 17 sonnets,
Yeah.
in which you get that. And then on the 18th, suddenly you get, "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day?" And, which has the line, "Thy eternal summer shall not." So it's the 18th sonnet where the poet, the writer is saying, "Okay, I'm going to make you live forever through my art. Forget the baby." Or
Yeah.
maybe not forget the baby, but like, watch what I could do.
Right. Right.
And I will say, Shakespeare gets a bad rap for those first 17. If I say Shakespeare, I mean Oxford, I mean whoever. It doesn't really matter in this context, but
Yeah.
he gets a bad rap for those first 17 sonnets. People say they're just like have a baby, but they are he is playing so creatively with very outworn tropes and rhetorical moves. And if you look at them carefully, he's setting it up very even in the third sonnet. Um, it ends with him basically saying, like, "If people don't remember your image,
Mhm.
you're dead."
Yeah.
So, it's like, is he really just saying have a baby, or is he starting to subliminally get this play on the kid's narcissism and be like, "Your image needs to live forever."
Mhm.
And you see as the sonnets go, as those first 17 go, he actually does introduce the notion, I think in 15, he introduces the notion that I will engraft you new as you also have children. So it's the first time he actually says like, "I could do this."
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and then in 17, he really starts to say like, "I could do it, but nobody would believe me if I really showed who you were."
It's interesting to me too because I've heard you mention this before, but like it's so funny you're talking about I will immortalize you, but nobody's quite sure who the fair youth of the sonnets is. Like we
Yeah.
have our ideas of Henry Risley, maybe William Herbert, whoever.
Yeah.
But that's so ironic.
It's so funny, and it's funny that you have on the top of every page,
Yeah.
Shakespeare sonnets, Shakespeare sonnets. It goes all through you Shakespeare throughout it, and then you never name the youth. Now, I should say,
Yeah.
uh, now that we're at sonnet 17, it is fascinating that that sonnet ends with him saying, do you have it in front of you?
17?
Yeah. This is when I wish I could just jump in my mind to the end
Yeah.
of the sonnet, but I'd have to say the whole sonnet out loud to get
Nope,
to the
no
end.
worries. You want the couplet, you're saying?
Yeah, the couplet.
Okay. Um but were some child of yours alive that time, you should live twice in it and in my rhyme.
Right. So were some child of yours alive that time, you should live twice in it, and in my rhyme. Now they always amend where the comma goes in the
Okay.
in
Okay.
the
Do the facsimile too.
yeah, the
Sure.
comma is in a different place in the facsimile, and it's fascinating where it's put in that one.
Yeah, no, it's yeah, because I've got the Oxford, that's like
Yeah,
my modern
yeah, it's
version,
beautiful.
but then the original effects, it's just there's only one comma. You should live twice in it, comma, and in my time.
And in my rhyme.
Yeah.
Now the funny thing is that comma seems so strange to us. It feels like it's in the wrong spot. It
Yeah.
says you should live twice in it and in my rhyme. That's what we
Yeah,
want.
that's
You
what
should live
they
twice.
yeah.
But he says you should live twice in it and in my rhyme. So what a man, I can't remember his name, discovered, and Alexander Wall definitely pointed out, was that in that very sonnet where he says you shall live twice in it and in my rhyme, in lines 4 has all the letters for William Rio Thessley twice,
Okay.
and it's rare to find it
Yeah.
once,
Well,
pretty rare to
well,
find it once, but line 4 has it twice and line 9 has it twice.
okay.
So in one poem where he says, "You shall live twice,"
Yeah.
we find his entire name twice in 2 lines, and we know Shakespeare's addicted to doublings and doublings and
Yeah.
doublings. I think that's interesting, and, that's all I'll say about that.
In general, you do favor Henry Risley as the fair youth? Like, that's who
Yeah.
you picture? Yeah? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and just to say, I do think of I think I already stated this, but I wanna make it clear. Some people when I get a little testy when people are only talking about these things as if they're historical documents where the writer wants to tell a truth. But I do the tradition of the sonnets is to play with reality. It is to use yourself as a persona. You use models of real people, and that's part of the playfulness. Penelope Rich clearly was being talked about in sonnet sequences, but I don't think it was because all these men loved her who were writing it or thought they had a special thing with her. I think it became a very playful way, the way Beyonce might make her way into other hip hop songs.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily telling us there was something huge going on between that person and that person, but
Yeah.
I think Henry was the model for the fair youth.
In terms of, let's say, literature versus straight biography, do you think it'd be fair for your view to say something like, you're not dismissing that there could be some sort of real biographical substrate, something really happened between some people here, but that in certain ways that could be just kind of a seed for, um, different kind of, like, amplifications or changes or plays on what really happened, so it's not gonna be a straightforward telling of what biographically really happened, but that maybe you still can get some glimpses into the biography if you play the game with him long enough and understand what he's doing or something like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and that's why I think it's totally fair if somebody's interest with any sonnet sequence of anybody, if somebody's interest is, "I wanna find out some reality stuff," go for it. You might find some cool stuff. Just be careful because part of the game of sonnet sequences is to play with reality a little bit. So, like
Mhm.
but I definitely think we find things in there. I think the scandal we're gonna talk about in a second, the scandal in the sonnets, I think that's probably pointing to real stuff, and I think here I've never thought of that. I'm gonna make an analogy, and this might not work. You know, like a Tarantino movie?
Mhm.
Like, he clearly wants to tell a story that captivates anyone who watches it. He wants basically anybody to get into the story, be impressed, laugh, be scared, and understand it. But then we know there's thousands of allusions in it. Sometimes playful, weird. He might make fun of a director from 1963 who everybody knows had a little technique, but he makes fun of it. Like, I think the sonnet sequences are like that. I think, like, they want to show that they're the best writer
Mhm.
out there, and they wanna do that by on every level possible. So, some of the inside jokes that do have historical precedence or poking at somebody, I think they're there, but
Mhm.
I think the writer doesn't care about that nearly as much as showing I'm kind of the best.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like a virtuoso performance regardless.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. So okay, so that gets us up to 17. Um, I love that you love Sonnet 8. I think it's beautiful. I think it's a beautiful sonnet. Music to hear, why hearest thou music sadly? Sweets with sweets were not, joy delights in joy. Why lovest thou that which thou receivest not gladly, or else receives with pleasure thine annoy? If the true concord of well-tuned sounds by unions married do offend thine ear, they do but slightly chide thee, who confound in singleness the parts that thou shouldst bear. I just think it's a beautiful sonnet, and it was one of the first ones that really caught me too, and just like loving how it sounded.
Yeah.
Um, okay, then I would say in terms of our little walkthrough structure, you get the nice, wonderful turn in Sonnet 18 where he says, "Okay, I'll immortalize you." Stephen Booth points out that he's so clever, Shakespeare's so clever that you really don't know that 18 is saying that until you read 19. But
Mhm.
he does such a good job with language that and retroactively, you can never forget that 18 is that. But you can read Sonnet 18 and read the word lines to mean lines of progeny,
Mm.
and then they aren't lines of poetry. And so he's being very coy even in Sonnet 18 by letting it mean multiple things. But then Sonnet 19 is when he first addresses time and he says, "Do not touch the fair youth. I will immortalize him. Stay back." Like, or like, I'm gonna do this now.
Yeah.
Um, and Sonnet 20, I would say, is the first he's playing with like, okay, I've just promised you I'm going to draw your picture metaphorically. And Sonnet 20 is a woman's face with nature's own hand painted. Hast thou the master mistress
Yeah.
of my passion?
This is the sonnet where I first thought, "This is really weird." The sonnet 20. Like, I don't know what's going on with this one.
And I'll tell you this,
Yeah.
when you read Sonnet 20 and many of the others, for the people who try to claim that we moderns are throwing sex into this and we're throwing homoerotics into this,
Yeah.
I promise you that's impossible. You can't read Sonnet 20. She pricked thee out for women's pleasure. Like he tells you the story of nature is creating the fair youth
Yeah.
and nature gets so aroused that the fair youth gets turned into a man
Yeah.
so that she can have him. And then the writer of the sonnets is saying, "Boy, I guess I can't have you then, that way." But it's like you just can't imagine somebody as intelligent as the writer of the sonnets. Every time in the sonnets, when he talks about how beautiful the fair youth is, that it's only meaning some heavenly type of beauty, especially Sonnet 20 tells you that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, I've been doing a long read through Ovid's Metamorphoses, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, that's obviously predates Shakespeare by many centuries, but even in that one, there is tons of stories about, gender switching, people moving from a male to a female, same-sex attraction, like, and
Mhm.
that had just been translated for the Elizabethan audience in the 1560s, so it's
Yeah.
not like they couldn't have understood ideas like this in my
No, and
part of literature.
no, and you get to have your cake and eat it too. Like, you get to see that he's playing with the sexual, aspect, but you also there really is a father to son feeling
Mhm.
too. Like, there's a mentor, there's a, like, "I care about you." He cares about the fair youth in ways that go beyond sex or beyond whatever erotics he's playing with, and also we gotta remember, I think Shakespeare was determined that his sequence would refer back to all the other main English sequences. So we have I think it's Barnaby Barnes or there's
Barby Rich, I believe, right?
okay.
Yeah. He's the one that has sort of a homoerotic sonnet
Yeah, and he got in
sequence, yeah.
trouble for it,
Yeah.
and then he had to change the introduction, and he had to say like, "Hey, look, if it looks like there's stuff about men loving men, that's not what I'm going for." It's like, but it's the most obvious thing.
Yeah.
So I think Shakespeare, I think he challenged himself, and I think he did write the sonnets over time and had to change the structure. But I think he was like always wanting to get in. That I've read all of your works. I love them. You guys are great.
Yeah.
I'm going to twist everything you did and make it a little bit better and subvert it.
Yeah.
So, okay. So then what I find really interesting is look, we're getting closer and closer to that preface sonnet 26, right?
Mhm.
So now we're at 20, and we got between 20 and 26. Those sonnets between like starting at 21 and getting up there, they're almost I find them as like containing a meta key on how to read the sonnets.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
It's really neat because he's getting up there. He's done all of his stuff about procreation. He's now claimed, "I will immortalize you." He's now given us 20 where he paints a strange picture of who
Yeah.
the master mistress thing. Um, and then in 21, he starts, I think, starting to give us like, here's a way to start looking at my sequence. And here's the ironic things I'm gonna do. And in 23, it ends with him saying, "Oh, learn to read what silent love hath writ. To hear with eyes belongs to love's fine wit." To hear with eyes. And I think, as many readers of the sonnets know, um, sometimes what's happening with the puns are visual because of the way the words look as opposed to how they sound. I can talk about that later.
Yeah.
But that sonnet is followed by 24, which is fascinating. It's the perspective art sonnet
Mhm.
where he says, how does it start?
Mine eyes.
"Mine eye hath played the painter, and hath styled thy beauty's form in table of my heart. My body is the frame wherein 'tis held. In perspective it is best painter's art. For through the painter must you see his skill, to find where your true image pictured lies, which in my bosom's shop is hanging still." What's the next line?
That hath his windows glazed.
Yeah, "By that eye." So he's saying, here's this picture of you I'm drawing in my heart, but it's perspective art, which I know you and I are into, but perspective art was the art where, like, you look at something and you don't really see what it is till you change your angle, and then you go, "Oh, that's what it is." So in Sonnet 24, he's saying perspective, it is best painter's art,
Yeah.
and then he's talking about the image of the fair youth that's in his heart. So he's basically saying, what if you're just seeing this straight on,
Yeah.
cool, you're not getting what I'm doing.
Yeah.
If you turn an angle, you can probably see it better. It's also, I noticed this, and I'm not sure it's been pointed out anywhere else I've seen it. It's the only sonnet where he uses both you and thou to refer to the fair youth.
Okay.
Now, that's fascinating that in the perspective art sonnet, he uses you and thou to refer to him. And in no other sonnets, he sticks clean like to you. He's
Yeah.
either using you or he's using thou.
So that would
Thought that was
suggest like a double, like a formal relationship and an informal relationship, perhaps?
well, people do try to think
Yeah.
of that, yes.
Yeah.
And at the very least, it suggests that it's perspective art, like, you can be a you can be a thou.
Yeah.
It depends on how I choose to draw you in a
Yeah.
certain way. Um
Like the informal would probably suggest more of a public,
Mhm.
you know, social view, and a formal would. Yeah, well, that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a book on it, and there's people that always dive in to try to understand, like, when he uses "you," can we find a pattern there?
Mm.
Um, and I think there is. I think "you" does have the more exalted sense,
Mhm.
but
Yeah.
I'm not sure. And then, we're getting right up there. So we have that sonnet, we have 25, which is interesting. 26 is the preface sonnet, which throws us right into the 100 sonnet center, starting with 27. Um, I mean, I think Hank talks about 27 as being referencing, the Essex Rebellion has just been thwarted, and Southampton is in the tower, and he uses that sonnet in some of the images in it very, very well to show, like, "Oh my gosh, something big did just happen,
Yeah.
and now there's a distance between us." It's great.
Yeah.
I think there's I think you could I think he could be right about that regardless of any of the other stuff. Shakespeare could have been using that incident
Yeah.
to start to describe both the emotional and the physical distance coming between them.
And that would make sense even from an Oxfordian position or, a Stratfordian position, because whether De Vere had this relationship with, Henry Risley, or if Henry Risley was Shakespeare's patron at one time, like, you could see that working in
For
multiple
sure,
interpretations, yeah.
for sure. And, when you do get before Oxford ever got thrown into the question, Sonnet 107 is the sonnet where it seems like he's saying, "The queen has died,
Mhm.
you've been let out of the tower, and we're back. Like, I get to be with you again." And a lot of scholars think that. A lot of scholars are fine with that.
Yeah.
So to the degree that if 107 is really grounding that right before a very important sonnet 108, if it's grounding that, it makes sense that you could see 27 is starting a narrative and it's using a certain context for that.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, okay, so that's 27. I would say now I might glide through it, but
One more second
yep,
there. I'm not sure if you're willing to divulge this, and if you're not, I'll
sure.
just cut this out. But that 108 marker, I'd done a little like that's what Sydney's sonnet is his sequence is 108. And I had just been trying to do a little bit of research of that. Does this change the nature of Shakespeare's sonnets after that? I don't know. Is there something about what new writer can come along or something to that effect after that sonnet? Would that be a correct understanding?
Do you mean, are you saying in the text itself, is there language to that effect?
Or is there some sense that something shifted after I know you have
Yeah.
multiple
Yeah.
patterns and everything running through, but is there some sort of shift that happens over after 108?
Yes, I think there is a shift, and I think it's an interesting shift, and both in terms of architecture,
Mhm.
there's a shift because it's not a surprise. People uh, have talked about Shakespeare's sequence being based on the number 153,
Yeah,
which creates a triangular number with a 17 sonnet base,
yeah,
and that's what I think is the actual structure of the sonnets.
yeah,
Um, so by Shakespeare putting so much attention to make sure he honored Sidney's pattern of 108 and the harmonics that go into that with
yeah,
different numbers, by honoring that so deeply and then going beyond it,
yeah,
I think that was his like, I think you're amazing. Watch what I can do.
yeah,
And literally after Sonnet 108, there's a distinct shift in the themes that had been going up to that point. It's suddenly right after 108, it suddenly becomes this thing about like the speaker of the sonnets, Shakespeare, being like, I cheated on you too. I snuck around. And you get these next 10 sonnets that are all kind of playing with like, I did it too, like you weren't the only one.
yeah,
And that's an interesting shift that comes right after 108. Now,
mm,
Hank noticed something. I think it's fine if we meander because this is
yeah.
fun.
Okay,
Um,
cool.
Hank noticed that right after 107, with Henry being let out of the prison,
Mhm.
you have exactly whatever many sonnets to 125 with the where it ought to me I bore the canopy. And Hank noticed that there's exactly that many days between when Henry got out of prison and when James
Oh,
James is
was
the
Lord of the
court.
Crown? Yeah,
Yes. So that's the exact amount of days, which is a cool little thing. I don't know if that could be
mhm,
luck or it could be there, but that's a nice thing. And I always think from an Oxfordian point of view,
yeah,
or not. I guess this goes beyond Oxfordian, but I've always thought, man, if that's true, if
yeah,
Oxford was doing that on purpose, it would be so cool if we could look at those individual sonnets leading up to 125 and find that he's referring to specific things that happened on those days through a document or something. Because if you could line up two or three more direct hits, that would be uncanny. And I don't know if anyone's tried to do that yet, but I'm interested. I'm
that was
interested in that.
fascinating. Hey,
Yeah.
one more thing about Sonnet 108 that I just noticed here when you're
Yeah.
saying that. That first line goes, "What's in the brain that may ink the character?"
No, what's in the brain that ink make character?
In the main character. And I just noticed the one line that always stands out from Philip Sidney's Sonnet 1, my favorite line of that one, he says, "Oft turning others' leaves to see if thence would flow some fresh and fruitful showers upon my sunburned brain." I just that the like
Yes.
I just wonder if that might be a callback because the first thing I remember, "sunburnt brain" is the first line that comes to me from Sidney's first sonnet.
No, Daniel, that's the first thing. I'm sure others noted this because
Yeah,
people do talk about that, but that was the first thing that I, on my own too, I saw the word brain,
yeah.
and I think if it's the case, I think Shakespeare puts it at the top of his sonnet, and I
Mm.
think Sidney has it at the bottom of his sonnet.
I think it's the middle. I just looked it up while you were talking. It's right in the middle.
Okay,
It's yeah,
and everybody always talks about Sidney's sonnet, how it's subverting the true process of invention. He's getting
mm,
it backwards.
mhm,
And then and that's his first sonnet.
yeah,
And then Shakespeare for the final sonnet of his Sidney
Yep.
playing with Sydney, he then says, I have nothing left to say. What's in the brain that ink my character? And he says, there's nothing more to say.
Oh,
So I think it's so clever that he uses Sydney's first sonnet, takes some language from it, and then it's the final of the 108. I just think it's a beautiful symmetry.
it's funny when you're getting that in depth with Shakespeare sonnets, it does make the other sonnet sequences more interesting in the sense you're like, what were those guys doing? What was he? Can I, that? Yeah,
You're
exactly.
gonna love this book, Daniel.
Yeah,
You're gonna read this and you're gonna help me understand it. But he goes into all those other guys you showed in your
yeah,
chart and more, and he shows that the Sydney Circle, they all noticed the 108 pattern. Half of 108 is 54 and the harmonics you can do, and they all played with those harmonics. And he does a great job showing that like clearly these guys were not just writing these love poems, they were really trying to show smarts and patterns. So
but showing smarts in a way that you could, like with that sprezzatura idea, like you make it look so easy, but you hide so much.
exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly.
So we're at 108.
Oh, no, we, sorry, let me go back.
Okay,
We're at, like, 30, but I guess I'll speed up. I'll
okay.
speed up. Basically, once you get into the 30s, at 33, which, Jesus died when he was 33, and it's Golgotha, he died on the hill of Golgotha. Um Sonnet 33, you can't read it without thinking of the crucifixion, so that's another interesting little thing. Um, but it's also when Shakespeare introduces the notion that there's a rift between him and the fair youth. Okay, that's important because for these next sonnets after 33, he really goes into the nature. Well, I shouldn't say he goes in, but he really is showing you there's a rift. It's social,
Yeah,
it's a scandal of some kind. And I think starting at 36, which I can't wait to talk about someday,
yeah.
I think starting at 36, he's actually starting to give you an understanding of the context in which he starts to want to play with his identity. And this is where Oxfordians will perk up. But I think even if you're Orthodox, I think you can't deny Shakespeare's playing with his identity a lot in the sonnets. And in 36 is when he basically says, "Look, I'm gonna take the hit socially. The blot," he used the word, "the blot will be on me. You won't have it. I'll take it."
Mm,
And you know what? You shouldn't use my name publicly because it'll ruin yours.
mm,
Um, and then he has this couplet where he's saying, "But you might speak of me publicly and ruin yourself." He says, "But do not so. I love you in such sort as thou being mine, mine is thy good report."
mm,
So I read that as saying, "Don't ruin your reputation by talking about me. Um, uh, as long as your reputation is strong, since you and I are one, I'll live off of your reputation."
mm.
But then 60 sonnets later,
Okay.
sonnet 96, it
Yeah.
has the exact same couplet.
Mm,
And, you'll have scholars like Stanley Wells and stuff think that's just a mistake and that's just an error, but it's ingenious how it functions. It functions in the exact reverse way, in my opinion, in Sonnet 96, where instead of saying like, since we're one, your good reputation is what I need. I'll live off of that. He's saying, at this point, um, your reputation is gonna be the sequence. It's the monument I'm building you.
mm,
So, it's the exact opposite. It's like you're relying on me,
mm.
not me relying on you. And it's an interesting reversal, and there's more to say about that. But 36 is where I think you start getting really interesting stuff about identity and hiding.
Oh,
39 goes into that. And then you get, I guess, structurally, the next interesting thing that people always hear about in the sonnets is starting in sonnet 40, you get 3 sonnets where suddenly you've got the poet, Shakespeare, you've got the fair youth, and you've got this woman, and it seems like they're all loving on each other.
yeah.
Were you gonna say something?
No, 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 keep going.
Okay. So those are 3 sonnets that introduce what many people would read as what we're gonna learn about as the dark lady in the final wing of the sonnets. But
Mhm.
here you get it in the first part of that, and it's just 3 sonnets, and they're fascinating, but it's where you have this love triangle.
So she's introduced, whatever that character is, earlier in the sonnet sequence briefly.
I believe so. Some people would say, "No, why would
Yeah.
you say it's her?" But I think it's really hard to argue for so many different reasons why he doesn't want the reader to start associating this mistress that he has and that also the fair youth has. Because in the Dark Lady sonnets, he does the same thing. He introduces 3 sonnets where he shows the tangle with the fair youth. So it seems very important to him that and it's 3 sonnets and it's a threesome and all that stuff. So it's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So you're going through the sonnets. You found out about the threesome, the mistress is there. And I guess the next like just main structural thing in the 40s. No, you're getting up to 50. Um, I mean, it's a huge one. 55. Hank points us out again. It had been pointed out before, but Hank shows us how he can use it. 55 is, the monument song. He uses the word monument. It's about the monument. It's a very, profound one of like, "This is the monument I'm making you." Um, and what's fascinating about that is 27 sonnets after that, you get Sonnet 81. It's the second sonnet to use the word monument. And 27 sonnets after that, you get 107, which is the third and only sonnet to use monument. So the only 3 sonnets in the sequence that use the word monument are 55, 81, and 107. And um, that's fascinating with something I'm gonna be talking about in September.
Yeah.
But it's also just interesting in and of itself that there's this sequence and where they stand and what they're saying.
That's great.
Yeah. So 55 has that. Oh, I'm skipping so many things, but then when you get up to 66, it's an interesting sonnet because it's just like a list. He's just listing and it breaks the sequence and he's like suddenly just saying all these reasons why he wants to kill himself because of all these reasons and they seem to be social. They seem to be about maybe the queen but then he's like I can't kill myself because then I'll leave you alone, okay? And yeah, I'm biting my tongue because
Yeah.
there's so many things I wanna say that I shouldn't say and about some of this stuff.
We're doing this as like an overall map. We're
Yeah,
hoping you'll come back to 5 poems at a time, 6, but whatever it is.
yeah,
Yeah, that poem does look odd on the page with all the ands,
yeah.
just right down the front, like yeah, like a list.
I'll tell you this, for anybody listening, and Daniel, if you look at that sonnet and then notice, 87, sonnet 87,
Mhm.
um, ends with the feminine ending ings,
Okay.
and it's always written about for that because it's like he ends 10 of the lines with ing.
Yeah.
And I noticed a few months ago that that one ends 10 lines with ing. 66 starts 10 lines with and they are equidistant poems from the side. So that's one of the symmetry moments.
Oh, yeah, it's great.
They overlap in so many ways. Those 2 poems are fascinating little poems because they really point to this other thing that's going on in the sonnets.
Would you say if everything you've seen in the sonnets, let's just say it's all true or most
Yeah.
of it's true, would this person have to be kind of a genius to write this thing? Like,
Yeah.
they would have to be working on another level, not only like the standard way of introducing new phrases, beautiful
Yeah.
phrases, rhythms, but having this vast structural network interweaving through
Yeah.
this whole sequence and making it look like it's almost not there. Like, you don't see it on the first time, right?
No, and I think that's the
Yeah. And even some
it's
scholars would probably deny that it's there to this day, you
of
know?
course,
Yeah, yeah,
of course. I mean, look, this is what's amazing to me.
yeah,
Stanley Wells and is it Jonathan Bate? I always say Bates, but it's Bate.
yeah,
They will tell you blithely and relaxed with relaxed shoulders, the sonnets are just a throwing together of
yeah,
poems
yeah,
with no, structure, or if the structure's there, it's just accidental, and these are 2 of the, like, considered the most great scholars. Now, fortunately, many other Orthodox scholars think that's the silliest thing to say. You don't have to be an anti-Stratfordian for people to say that's unbelievable that, somebody could think that, but yeah, they do think that, and they go around proudly saying it.
yeah,
Um, but I will say this, it's like this I do think of Nabokov all the time with this, that kind of genius and yet an understanding of the texture of a sentence, but also like Pale Fire.
Yeah.
And all of his books have these elaborate structures where people are still finding games that he played.
Yeah.
And every sentence is beautiful and fun to read.
Yeah.
That's Shakespeare to me. And I think if you think that he got the first idea to write his sequence, let's say 1595.
Yeah.
Let's say, because that's when, like, the sequences were happening and it was becoming a big deal. The scandals were happening between if he started thinking of his structure in 1595,
Mhm.
and let's say he finished it a little bit before June of '04,
Okay.
um, that gives him 10 years
Yeah.
to really when he's not doing something else and he's blocked on a play,
Mhm.
to just sit at night and have so much fun thinking of all the games he's playing
Yeah.
in the sequence. So I think it's very possible for someone that smart to
Yeah.
just and would love to play with it like that. Now,
Talking about directors, one other one that came to my mind was Stanley Kubrick
mm,
for that way because, you know, he at at the very basic, every shot was perfect. Like
mhm,
he wasn't like I'm gonna focus on all these strange games that I'm playing in the back. Also, every shot was gonna be masterfully shot. Like on the just basic filmmaking is gonna be perfect. But on top of that, I'm gonna play all these introduce all these patterns throughout all my movies, and the more you think about them, the more of them show up, and then
mhm,
people will still argue, "Did he really intend that? Are you seeing
yeah,
it?" And
yeah,
also even people that worked with him barely like, "I don't know if he was really meaning that." So
yep.
it sets up a very similar type of it's fascinating, but you're always doubting yourself, "Is that real, or am I reading into it?" Or yeah,
Exactly. What I think they love, and I think
yeah,
Shakespeare loved it, and they are set up in a way that you most of these patterns, you couldn't confirm unless the artist told you.
yeah.
Some of them become more and more undeniable because of the structure, but
Mhm.
even those, you just wish you had one letter from the writer to his friend saying, "Hey, look for this pattern that in my sequence." It would be so helpful.
I think in my head, I'm not the kind of person that really needs them to say. I just assume they did. Like,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
like I just like I can't know. But like for someone like Nabokov or Joyce or something, like
yeah,
some people say this is nonsense. I'm like, I don't think it is. It
yeah, yeah, yeah.
doesn't seem
But I
like
guess
it
but
to
I
me.
guess I guess the thing I'm saying is that,
Yeah,
we know that Nabokov put, let's say, 4,500 patterns in Pale Fire consciously
yeah,
that he's proud of.
yeah,
But we also know that the human mind, once they see that he's doing this, will find 80,000,
yeah,
and we don't know which ones
yeah,
are the 4,000 he wanted and which ones are just because the mind will find patterns.
yeah.
And that's what I struggle with as I find these delightful moments. I have like levels of certainty, and some of my favorite ones are low on my level of certainty, and some of them are medium.
And I
Yeah.
think Nabokov knew that because that whole novel is about a guy who's overreading and misreading a poem,
Yeah,
the central poem. So like you can't
exactly.
even work that into the text.
Yes, yes.
So
Okay, so 66, we talked about that. Now, an interesting little thing that happens in the 60s is suddenly at 63, you get from 63 to 68, they all go to the third person.
mm,
I'll just leave it at that. I have some ideas about that, and people try to figure out if there's a reason for that.
mhm,
Um, for the most, intense viewers who just don't have anything to do, for the rest of the night, if you look carefully at Sonnet 62, it does something that I think might playfully point to why it snaps into third person, but I'll leave it at that.
they still leave us with homework once in a while.
Yeah, that's your homework. Your homework is look at 62 and see why that might kick off
Yeah.
a sequence of third person.
Put your
Alright,
answers
okay.
in the comments.
Then we get to, um we get up we're inching up to the center of the sequence. We're inching up to 76 and 77, which are these incredible centerpieces. Um, but before that, we hit, for instance, 72 and 81. Um, 71 and 72, we get these incredible declarations of forget my name will be buried, my name will be forgotten. Um, we could do a whole podcast on those. And then, um, I have to say, just because in the Philip Sidney 108 sequence,
Mhm.
72 and 81 are like pivotal, and it has stuff to do with music theory, but it's a third and a fifth. But anyway, to get to 108, you can either get there going 36, 72, 108, or you can get there going 27, 54, blah, blah, blah. So you 72 and 81. Oh, and 81. 72 and 81 are kind of like these very precious numbers in the Sydney one that some of the Sydney circles seem to play with. It's that. And in Shakespeare sequence, 72 and 81 are directly symmetrical from the endpoints, which is interesting. They didn't have to be, but they are.
Yeah.
And they are two of the most profound hide and go seek sonnets in terms of what is my name, what will be forgotten. I think 81 is the quintessential. If you are an authorship skeptic
Mhm.
and you had to hand one sonnet to somebody, you would hand them 81.
Okay.
Because that's the sonnet where he said, it seems like a paradox, where he says, hey, look, you're going to live forever because of my poems. My poems are going to make you live forever. I am going to be forgotten.
Yeah.
That's no one's done that in the tradition of sonnets. It's always I will be remembered. Sometimes they let the person be remembered, but it's very much like
Yeah.
these are so good. I'm going to be remembered. He's saying these are so good.
Yeah.
You're going to be remembered,
Yeah.
but I'm going to be forgotten.
Mhm.
And that only makes, I mean, if you're trying to logically work with that and ask, how could somebody be forgotten
Yeah.
even though their poems are eternal? And there's certain answers you can get to.
Yeah. That's very interesting.
So, and then 76 is, an incredible little sonnet where he's saying, why don't I do anything creative with these sonnets? They're all the same. There's nothing creative going on. And, in the middle of it, it says, every word doth almost tell my name. And that's an interesting thing. What do you mean every word is almost revealing yourself? What does that mean? Almost tell your name. And the word tell becomes very important in the sequence because tell can mean say
Yeah.
or it can mean count. Like to tell, a teller is also a counter. And he plays with that in that sonnet and in 136 where he says the name Will, I am Will. But anyway, 76, 77. And then we just keep going through. I'm going to skip a bunch of stuff
Mhm.
because, I'm feeling my fatigue. But
Yeah.
I know that you have a blast looking at 96. I told you 96 and 36 have the same couplet.
Okay.
Oh, and by the way, 96 and 36, of course, the center of them is 66.
Mhm.
And 66 is that weird sonnet that is that list of like strange social irritations. And 36 and 96, well, it's kicking off this question of
Mhm.
what's the scandal that went on that Shakespeare keeps referring to, and what was the problem? And so 66 has a fun relationship to those two, I think. And then we get up to the Sydney sonnet in 108. Uh, then we get into Shakespeare saying, "No, no, I also cheated on you. I also was wayward." Um, that goes up to 117, um, which to me is a very important sonnet. Uh, and then we're getting up towards the end, and I guess the only thing to point out is there's a way in which you can think of Sonnet 122 as an endpoint a little bit because that's where he says this thing about like, um, I'm gonna, you're in my mind. I remember. It's a memory sonnet. It's like I'm not gonna. People think he's saying that book you gave me, that gift you gave me, I gave to somebody else.
Mm.
But I don't need it because I'll remember you. I don't need your gifts to remember you, and it can be read that way. But it can also be read the book I gave you, the gift that I gave you is the sonnets. It's this monument that I've written for you, and I don't need it. It's a record of you. I don't need it because it's in me,
Yeah.
and I read it as that.
Yeah.
Um, and then we do the three, I call them the time sonnets because 123, 124, and 125. 123 starts with no as the first word,
Mhm.
and it's to time. He's addressing time again directly for the second time in the sequence. And then 124 has no starting the second stanza. And he's not addressing the fair youth. It it's not addressing time directly, but it's much more about time, and then 125 puts no at the start of the 3rd stanza,
Okay, yeah.
and then 126 chops off the couplet. So you have this no, no, no descending downward, and then you chop off the final couplet of 126. It's gone. And everyone wants to know, there's all these theories as to why did you do that? I have thoughts, but I do like the structural aspect of like those no's coming down and then you chop off the couplet.
So
And
someone does that though, they gotta be playing games.
of course,
There's no way that this is like, "Oh, don't worry about the sonnets, I forgot to put a coupling in, they're just random poems."
I know people are like people are like it, and also the entire sonnet of one it's I don't even think you can call it a sonnet. 126 is made of couplets. So
Okay.
everything's getting so condensed that
Mm.
even in that last sonnet of the 100 sonnet center, it's almost like the world is condensing the writing into just endings, 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 and then he chops off the end. I think it's brilliant. I love it.
That's great.
So then we jump into 127. In the old age, black was not counted fair, or if it were, it bore not beauty's name. It's a wonderful. It's one of my favorites, and it's the introduction to the what they call the Dark Lady. Um, and I, what I can say about the next 26 sonnets is,
Yeah.
um, people think of them as much more raunchy, much more dark, misogynistic. Um, they just really get into these tangly. He's angry at her. He's calling her names, but there is a structure to them. They do develop, in my opinion, from more of a very quickly at the beginning. There's more of a benevolent thing going on about her, and then you start to see it twisting into him seeing what she's done as evil. And what is it she's done? Is it that she's cheated on him? Is it that she's left him for the fair youth? It's all suggestive in there.
Mhm.
But the games that are being played to me are much more interesting. The language is much more interesting than any of that. I'll say, let me cut quickly to um, 135 and 136 are the sonnets where uh, he plays with the word will like 22 times and he's showing you all the different meanings that the word will can have, and they're often sexual because will could refer to either genital, male or female. It could mean your desire. It could mean so he's playing with like sentences that will can kind of do anything it wants.
Yeah.
And then at the end of 136, he says, "My name is Will."
Mhm.
So of course, I guess some people love that because it's like Shakespeare is saying his name is Will. I'm with Alexander Waugh that if that couplet is saying, "My name is Will," from this genius
Yeah.
in a context where he's having so much fun playing with that Will gets to mean a whole bunch of things,
Yeah.
and even in that sonnet, he says, "My will is one, one is reckoned none."
Yeah.
So he says, "My will is one is reckoned none." Then in the number, let me pass untold. Then we get the word tell, told. Let in the number, let me pass untold. So he's going through the sonnets unrecognized.
Yeah.
My name is Will at the end.
Well, a
Is just
pseudonym can be a kind of name.
yeah,
Yeah. Oh, yeah,
yeah.
I'm just looking at the facsimile version, and all the wills are italicized, like, it's really,
Yeah.
like, he's doing something here.
Yeah, so that's fun, 136, and then, I'm very proud of the fact I'll pat myself on the back. I always read one thing you'll always read 145, Sonnet 145, and you'll know the word better than me. It's not in pentameter, it's in hexameter, I think. It's
Oh,
8
like,
syllables,
okay.
and I'd say 80 to 90% of scholarly responses to this sonnet is that they love Stanley Wells loves this. This is obviously a sonnet that he wrote when he was a young man, 19, 20. And look at the bottom. It has a pun on Anne Hathaway. They always make fun of everybody for finding puns in the sonnets, but
Yeah.
they think that what's the last line? The last 3 lines is like,
"From heaven to hell is flown away. I hate from hate away she threw."
hate away. Yeah.
Yeah, and
I hate from
yeah,
hate away she grew.
yeah.
Yeah. Anne Hath. So, but I always found when I read that sonnet,
Mhm.
yes, it's light and it's got a kind of a simple conceit. It starts off with the woman saying the word, um, it sounds like she's gonna say, "I love not you," but at the end, she turns it, so
Yeah.
she's not saying that. But I think it's so brilliantly and beautifully it's fun to say. I know every time I'm going through the sonnets, I love the sounds and the feeling in my mouth as I say it,
Mhm.
and, I had always felt that reading all these commentaries that shit on it, and
Mhm.
then I read first Nabokov. I came across Nabokov talking about it, and he said, "This is a brilliant sonnet written by a master who's playing with a little ditty. He couldn't have written it like this when he was a little boy."
Okay.
And then my god, Stephen Booth, when I first read his thing on it, he has the same opinion. He's like, "This is like a really well put together poem. Sure, it's not as deep and it's not as complex, but like it's a highly skilled effort that isn't coming like in an early phase of his writing." I thought that was great. I felt
Yeah.
glad that my intuitions took me there.
Fascinating.
And then we're basically getting close to the end. Yeah, we crawl up to the end and we get to 152, and that's the final sonnet to the mistress. It's pretty dark, and yeah, I can't go. Part of me, I keep stopping because I wanna
Yeah, you
draw
wanna get
links.
further.
I'm like, that's how it is. And then you get the 2 Cupid sonnets, 153 and 154, and you call it a day.
And do you do consider the lover's complaint to be connected to this? This scene.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I think that he thought like I think that he thought of them separately in terms of wholes, like he wanted them to each stand on their own. But it is interesting that, again, one of the uh, he I think this is the way it is. There's 49 stanzas in A Lover's Complaint. If you add the 49 to the 54, you get 199.
Mhm.
Anyway, there's a few people that have written about the overall structure, even of the including Lover's Complaint. It seems like they see reasons why Shakespeare thought of them as a unit in that
Mhm.
sense, and I do. But I've grown to really like A Lover's Complaint.
Yeah.
But I spend my time reading sonnets.
Okay, so I guess we're probably can wind up to a close. You're probably getting tired. Um, yeah, we should definitely revisit all of this. Like, I'd love to just even talk with you about one isolated thing or,
Yeah,
one little just give us 8 sonnets to read before the episode and we could just talk about them, something like
yeah.
that. Um,
I want to do that. I want to do that with the like the 4 or 5 aristocratics, the sonnets where it's really fun to think about, like, could somebody have written this
Mhm.
who's not in the inner circle?
Yeah,
And there's like 4 or 5, and those are just fun because you could read them before we talk, and we
yeah,
could like go back and forth.
okay. So, maybe I'll just leave you with a closing question. Like, it's obvious that you have poured over these sonnets, thought about them, made them part of your mind and something you cycle through. And, like, you're, like, light years beyond my understanding of the sonnets, which is great to see, like, it's fascinating. It kind of shows, like, if you put in the time to really consider this, you could get this great, detailed, fascinating, perceptions of this as an artwork, right? And I even saw this, like, when I was going through, like, critical reception of different writers to the sonnets, over time. I saw Virginia Woolf was talking about, like, she was poring over them and talking about, like, I think I don't know, we could I could research it and we could read what she thought of them, but I got this idea that she was, like, really liking the setting up a thought, alternating of a thought, subverting it. So I was thinking, if you wanna get to this sort of level of appreciating the sonnets, like, how would you approach doing this? And maybe it's just, like, get yourself a copy of Stephen Booth's book or,
Yeah,
what is the starting point? Or just read them for yourself, make your own notes for a while. Like, how
yeah,
would you recommend if someone wanted to get to the point where you or Stephen Booth or
yeah.
these sonnet devotees got to, where would you start? And because I found for myself, when you first read through them, you get to that remember that poem you were saying that, like, "I write these poems ever the same?" Like, I wonder if he's joking at us. It's like, "It seems like you're repeating yourself a lot here." Like, you're hitting the same note again and again and again,
Yeah,
and, like,
yeah.
without an eye for that subtlety, you know,
Mhm.
you could you could, kinda miss the, I don't know, like, the depth of these works, and even
Yeah,
for, like, the plays, I find the plays easier because there's so much variety in them. Like,
yeah,
to me, Love's Labour's Lost is, like, kind of an obscure but I see so like, I feel you could in that play, you could go so many directions, but it includes so much in it that it's kinda
yeah,
obvious once you get into the era, you could see what he's working with, where the
yeah,
sonnets, it just feels like it's so I just I'll leave you with that question, like, what are some advice you'd give someone who wants to see the sonnets the way you see them?
yeah. I love that, and I actually and I think it also points to just how wonderful narrative is. Like in Love, Labor's Lost and the plays, it is just really fun to be taken from this incident happens. What's gonna happen between those 2 people? That's what it's so satisfying just to have plot.
Mhm.
And in the sonnets, you're not getting plot. You're only getting little hints at it. Or you get to look through a window that's like a kaleidoscope. Like you just don't get it.
Yeah.
So I would say, um, assuming somebody has the motivation, that's the first thing, because
Yeah.
I don't know why anyone would have the motivation, but assuming somebody has the motivation to take up the sonnets.
Yeah.
I'm thinking off my feet, but I would say that person should start with 4 or 5. They should probably talk to somebody 4 or 5 maybe of the classics
Yeah.
that are just like because the classics are classics because they don't rely on the sequence. Like,
Mhm.
"Shall I compare thee to a summer's day?" Even though it's beautifully embedded in the sequence, you can lift it out and you can relate to it. There's others like that. I would say start with those or ones that if you know the ones you like, start with 5, 4 or 5 that you like. Then notice what you like about it. Notice if it's the sound in the 4th line, you just love how that rolls off the tongue, or it's the image. Like, notice maybe 2 or 3 things in each sonnet, like, "I just love that."
Yeah.
And then get your Booth,
Yeah.
'cause Booth will not interpret it for you. He doesn't tell you what's going on. He just shows you all the modular patterning stuff. And then you'll probably take a sonnet that you already like and you've thought about, and you'll go, "Oh, that's fun.
Mhm.
That's true. I didn't notice that that syntax could be read like that." And you'll start the sonnet will start becoming this very interesting object for you.
Mhm.
And if you got 5 sonnets that become super fascinating for you, it's not gonna take long for the sequence because the same thing that happens inside an individual sonnet where it just becomes this amazing little animal. You
Mhm.
can't believe what each little sonnet is.
Yeah.
They link together in those ways too, and Booth
Mhm.
talks about that in his actual book, not the commentary, but his book, the essays on the sonnets.
Okay.
You start seeing that the same thing that Shakespeare is doing inside each sonnet, he's doing between them. And then it just becomes this really fun thing for your mind to run into. And if you have a mind like me that doesn't remember much,
Yeah.
it getting to I keep getting to slam into these things and be like, "Oh yeah, I
Yeah.
love that."
Yeah. Okay, well, I guess we'll let you go now, but
Okay.
thanks so much for giving us this overview, and I hope you do keep being our teacher for some of the things that you're seeing in this. So, anyway, thanks anyone for listening in. We'll be back uh, sooner or later with some new series. I'm not sure if Jeff, you have something you want to tell anyone, or
The only thing I wanna say is pretty soon I'm gonna I'm gonna start trying to do smaller videos on sonnets and on some thoughts that should just be fun for me to think about and, 8 to 10 minutes for a viewer to watch. And I wanna end by thanking you because I loved the, little context, the introduction you gave. That was really helpful. Thank you.
okay, okay. So, let's talk. We'll talk to you next time, Jeff, and thanks for anyone who's listening.
Okay. See you later.
Okay, bye
Bye.
for now.